We're here in the home of Wade and Vivian Hayes. It is July the 12th, 2001, and our purpose is to start the interviews to preserve Sarah Hayes Packard's history. And we figured that Wade and Vivian would know the most, so we start with them. I have a rough outline, and we'll follow some of that. But I guess we'll just get started. Wade and Vivian, before we get into the specifics of Sarah's childhood and her life, we'd like to know something about her roots, beginning with her relationship to William Williamson. And if either one of you could, in a nutshell, tell the William Williamson story and how Sarah was connected to that.
Well, William Williamson, of course, was the first pioneer in this area. He came over here after the Civil War and settled down, homesteaded, and by and by raised all of his family. Part of them, a few of them in Louisiana, and most of them here. And of course, farming was the way that everyone made a living, and that was very humble circumstances. Pioneer in the fullest sense. And William Williamson and Joycine Demerits were just that said couple. And from them descended many children, one of which was my grandfather, Jasper Williamson by name. He married Mary Jane Baker first, and then he had another marriage later. But Mary Jane Baker was sickly. In those days, they didn't have good doctors, they didn't have good medicine, and she passed on after 3 children. My mother was number 2. Margaret Williamson, or Maggie they called her. She married Ellis Raymond Hayes back in 1914. And consequently, from them, they had 6 children. Wade, myself being the oldest. And then thereafter, 5 other children. And Wade, of course, was married in 1939 to said Vivian Church. And from that marriage, I will make a little introduction to a thought that occurred with respect to Sarah at this point in time. That gives you a little bit of her roots, geographically and also genetically. Geographically, they lived here. And so, before Sarah was born, in our early days of marriage, we didn't know much about health, nutrition, or physical fitness. And in one sense of the word, Vivian, or Grandma as we call her, was not too well. She miscarried early in the marriage. And subsequent to that, we had a stillborn child. And
It was 1 year later.
Well, the 1 year later. And we had prepared the baby bed with great anticipation, because we looked forward, as any joyous parents would, to a little child. But we lost that one. And therefore, we were child conscious to the nth degree. And by, Vivian got pregnant with little Sarah.
2 years later.
And 2 years later. And we were so concerned and even worried and grieved because we were afraid that it might happen again. So we went to our current mission president and asked for a special blessing. And if I ever heard a man plead with the Lord, knowing our circumstances by explanation to him, he pleaded with the Lord that we might have a child, a live child. And we took a lot of heart in his blessing. We didn't understand a lot about it, even blessings then. But all we knew is that we had hard luck. And that was part of our adversities and trials. And we call it strong tribulation. But by and by, the Lord blessed us with little Sarah. And we didn't even have a comfortable automobile to take Vivian to the doctor. But we borrowed our neighbors, which is a relative, my great uncle, and his wife, Aunt Sadie. And Uncle Cal was a jovial person. And when he found out that Sarah was born, a bouncing baby girl instead of a boy, he said, "Well, Wade, you're still boss." And we took that semi-seriously. But that was the beginning of Sarah. But at the early on stages of little Sarah, there are a few things that were extremely significant about little Sarah, even from day one. She had the brightest little eyes, little dark, piercing eyes, and that radiated from her bodily countenance. That was the most, well, now she said a very pug nose at the time. It finally grew out to be normal, but it was little pug nose. And that was noticeable, but we loved her with a passion. And so,
your glasses
I
have a
don't
little
remember this
reflection.
about her birth was.
Take your glasses off if you can see it all without them.
okay, oh, I can.
Lights.
I do well without the glasses.
Oh yeah, because you. Can
So
see
anyway, it was very noticeable in the early stages, and of course we tended to her and this and that and the other in a normal fashion, and our grandma did most of the tending, but I was working hard trying to find a way to make a decent living, and engaged in that endeavor. But grandma did most of the tending and caring for and teaching, training, motivating all through the years. And I was off in doing church work more than I should, I guess. Even though it was church work, I think I would have done well to do more things with the kids. But I did have, with all of our 4 children, I had a love. I could not define it. I could not describe it. And I did not put the time, but that love was a passion, that I loved the little children. And so I did have that virtue, if you want to call it a virtue. But she had those piercing eyes and beautiful child. I can still see her as a little baby in my imaginary mind, how piercing those eyes. But I'll hasten to say that those eyes, to me, and even to this day, reflect that she had a high, not only IQ, from the very beginning, but she had a spiritual feeling that radiated from her countenance through her eyes. So her eyes she had never looked sluggish child, a sleepy child, was wide awake, enthusiastic from the day one. And wherever she went thereafter, whatever she did, and Mother will tell you some other things, but you'll see that Sarah Hayes was that type of an individual at an early age. And then we know the story henceforth. So I'll turn the time to Grandma and let her say a few things about her. And that takes care of her geographical history, and it takes care of her genetics through family, and also early days.
There's a few things I want to ask you. This story has been told a lot of times, but would you briefly tell the William Williamson conversion story?
Well, there's a lot of ways to tell it. And in substance, it all amounts to the same thing. Whether or not these precise words were used, we'd say somewhat like Brigham Young when he get to Valley. This is the place, drive on. Well, you've heard those words. He could have said it a little bit different, but it meant precisely the same thing. And it's the same way about William Williamson. Apparently, the Lord had prepared him over in Louisiana. His faculties of mind, he was, as the saying goes, my sheep know my voice, and they will not follow a stranger. It's a beautiful parable in the Bible, or statement. And he was just that such a person, prepared. And maybe not Joycine, even though she was faithful to the core, and she, it was reflected in one of the mission presidents who was out here, went back to Salt Lake in General Conference, talked about Joycine demerits, her faithfulness. But William Williamson, to me, was the one, the little short guy that could walk on his hands. He was probably prematurely older than would catch the eye, but he had never really joined any church. And when he first encountered or interacted with the two missionaries that came here, he had that spirit of acceptance, which is the blood of Israel. And he used that expression. Them are my boys. And this is a true church. This is a church I want, or I will embrace.
Them is my men.
Them is my men. And verbally, he might have used it in correct language, but a beautiful principle prevailed in his acceptance. That's all I remember about it. I can just see him in my visionary mind. I can see him when he looked at in that direction. He saw him coming down the road with their big hats and black coats and whatever. But he accepted them. He didn't question that. He didn't slam the door. It was a total conversion, in a sense, the way I see it.
Tell me, what was the church like when Sarah was born here in Williamson?
Well, it had growing pains. Let's use that. In early days of the church, missionaries would do well to convert and bring into the church one single person. And that might be through a part member family, where their husband or the wife would finally be coaxed to join the church. And they would do a lot of fellowship and play ball or anything they could do to build up the teaching situation. But when we had celebrations, outings, they were just as real and enthusiastic and fun as they are today in a different natural modern setting. In those days, we were just as live at a rodeo, or we were just as live in horse racing. I still remember standing out on the road down the old Sally Hill. Whenever the horse races would take place, and Millie Norland, for example, would ride those horses, I just got a thrill that intrigued me.
How many members?
And well, we would have about a half a dozen priesthood, Melchizedek priesthood members, week after week, year after year, and we would chew on some of the little problems local. that maybe it would take us a year to get a sign out in front of the church. We want a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints sign. But we had an old chapel, and they did the little practical things. They all knew we had to have a building, so everybody pitched in. And when Sarah was little, she was not devoid of the conventional programs of the church, the primary and all. So she got a pretty good, part of that in her early days. She was not denied the primary and MIA relief side, even though there were quite a few in the organization. And we call it MIA then. And young men and young women, Boy Scouts, explorers, and what have you.
How many members of the branch would customarily attend?
Well, when we were organized in 1953, we had 120. That's the population of the attendance at the ward. Williamson was a branch with about 120.
How many would attend?
Well, we had a pretty good attendance. We had built up, and Sylvia had up to about 75. So our geographical wards and branches then were very few. Orange had very few, just a handful, and they call it a Sunday school. And finally, they organized a branch with Earl Hilton as the first branch president. Well, I remember that. I was there. But anyway, I think even though we were crude in our early days and did things unconventional, that Sarah and the children, our children, because we had other families that had young families like the Forties, and it gave us a strength, just like you're going to do out at the Packard plantations. And that's the way I see it. Now, Grandma may put in a little different view, but I see it that way. I watched it pretty close.
Let's talk
and
about
answer your question.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about you. Your great-grandfather was William Williamson?
Yeah.
And so you were obviously born and raised a member of the church. Were you active all of your life as a young boy?
No. There's several reasons for it. I don't blame my father. I don't blame my mother, even though my father was around there. The first 20 years, I will tell you up front that I would sit on the back so they would not call on me to pray. I never uttered a prayer in public, in the church, or in public for 21 or 2 years. I never read a book in school because my folks did not coach me or encourage me, not because they didn't have the interest at heart, but because in their traditions, they didn't have but about a 5th or 6th or 8th or 9th grade education. And they didn't know. And even then, they didn't go full year. And so they had to scoop up a little education by experience, learn to write. And that's the main thing. So they didn't know to study at home, take a book at home, even though the teacher would say, well, we want you to study. So I didn't study. I didn't read a book till I was about 21 years old, because my folks did not encourage me to go to church. I would go when I were here. I'd go to church, to MIA or Sunday school, but I was not considered active. They never approached me to give me the Ronnie priesthood even. They just didn't. And it never approached me to give me the Holy Melchizedek priesthood till I was in the early 20s prior to my true conversion. Now, I always believed in the church, subconsciously and consciously, and I loved it. And I didn't, but I was not active. I went to school and had fun, and I went into show business, and that's a long ways from the religious life. But when I was converted in my early 20s, it was gung-ho. The rest of my life, I was like Paul, I'd say, if I can use that boastful term, that 60 plus years, 65 years, But I've been a member, theoretically, I've been a member 86 years, and that's my current age.
Well, tell me about your true conversion then. What happened? How did it happen?
Well, it was kind of gradual. When in show business, I looked around and I don't know whether the Lord was working on me. I feel like He was. I looked around and I saw the show people. I said, this is not what I want. Subconsciously, or as I wanted a wife and children and family. And I hadn't even thought too much about a religious life, except that between seasons when I got off out of show business, it was easy to go to church because they had attractions. I could be faithful with all my soul for the fact that they had an MIA program, and a very active one in El Dorado. And I'd go because they would invite the family, and then I had fellow family members that would take us to the socials, MIA socials. Nobody can appreciate it more than I can, because that was a draw, a magnetic draw, and I gravitated toward that invitation. And then when I got in, and you get around the gospel, it's like going into a flour mill. When you go to a flour mill, you're going to get it all over you. And that's the way it did me, and it just saturated my mental faculties and my goals and ideals. It all harmonized, and it wrote me a little preliminary ideal plan of life. And I can show it to you today, and it'll tell you that Brother Hayes pretty well followed that, and it was not a patriarchal blessing force, but it was an addendum to it. And I followed that, and I believed it, and it was your instincts give you the surge to go forward. So that was a true conversion. And I read in the Bible. I'm not a reader of the scriptures. I wasn't taught in all those areas righteousness. But I read in the Bible one time in a sacred experience. I lifted my aspirations upward heavenly, and I said, I want to know if the Lord was there. I just always wondered that. And I read a little bit, and I got a little bit of spiritual rejuvenation, and I said, internally, I didn't verbalize. I said, are you there? And the Lord answered me. He showered me with a sweet spirit. And one it's the sweetest spirit that I ever had. You know, it was not only comforting, but it was tangible. Like electricity converted to righteous, heavenly feeling. And he was saying, yes, I'm here. Even though I didn't make a turnaround right then, I never forgot it. Got it on record. And those are kind of things associated with conversion. Early days, whenever you weren't a seasoned individual up here. You hadn't had the years and decades behind you. You just were early on in your life grasping for something important. And it turned out to be, and I understood that way from early days. I understood 65 years ago, hey, this is what I wanted. This is it.
You mentioned that you were in show business, and you sort of looked around and decided you wanted something better than what they had. What kind of business were you in? What did you do? Where did you travel? Tell us about that.
Okay. First place, my father, like father, like son. My father was a tap dancer. He could dance, and because he played the fiddle, we call it the fiddle, not the violin, because he played and dances. He was the life of the party, and of course that appealed to me as a son of my dad, and I watched every move he made. And when he had danced, I'd want to dance. And I want to try. And we had no formal teachers whatsoever. All we had to do was just practice, do our self-training. So whenever he got to dancing, little as he did, I wanted to monkey see, monkey do. I wanted to mimic what he did. As a little kid, I've seen little kids, yours, all of them want to dance. And I was one of those. And I started shuffling and dancing. And as I got older, I got somehow instinctively, you can practice anything, you do a little better. Home talk, private talk. And so I got good enough to think that I could aspire to become a professional dancer, even without lessons. So I had vain enough, or at least I had an ambition to be a professional dancer. So one time, a little country show. In those days, in the Depression years, it was hard to make a dime from the 30s to the 39, somewhere in there. It was all depression for most people. Severe depression in a few years. But when the little show came into town in Smackover, Arkansas, my brothers and sisters and all of us went to it on Friday night. They had the concert. They had the talent show.
Were you here or in Arkansas?
I was in Arkansas. I dilly-dallied back from Arkansas to Texas because I hitchhiked back and forth. I didn't have a car.
How old were you?
Oh, about 19.
Okay.
Anyway, I would go, I got to be pretty good on dancing, even though no formal training. And I was about 160 pounds or 69. As strong as an ox, but could dance all over. Consequently, they had a concert, or they had a talent show that every Friday night to draw local people. I entered the contest. And they got it by acclamation. The winner would get by acclamation, and I won the prize. And the manager of the Davis Brum Comedian show, his wife was more or less wore the pants, and she was the boss. But she called me backstage and says, "Hey, would you like to travel with our show?" It was a repertoire show. In other words, 3-act dramas and vaudeville acts between. They said, "We'd like for you to dance between." And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm footloose and fancy free." I didn't sleep a week that night, but my brothers would applaud. The sisters, they would applaud on my behalf so loud that I won the contest, whether I earned it or not.
Package style.
Package style. We just supportive with acclamation. And so that's the way I got into show business. It just drifted into it. It's like a leaf on the current. I just hear it went. And I went with them, and they liked me, and I liked them.
Tent show.
A tent show. How long were you in that business?
2 seasons. Well, a summer season. They couldn't travel in the wintertime. It's too cold. So they went through the summer, and they would stay up 1 week, and then move on over the weekend. And you'd ride on the big top, the big truck, our truck, and put big bundles of canvas all over. They'd break it down, and they knew how to drive the stakes. And whatever, they knew all about. They call it the boss canvasman. He was a canvas specialist, and he supervised tearing down and putting all the seats in there, putting the stage up. So I doubled on that. They saw fit to put me to work. Very little pay, but I was getting opportunities to move up in the show business. They tried me on little dramatic parts and bits and pieces, and I did poorly, but I did all right in dancing. And they'd call me guest artist when I go to, say, Fort Smith, Arkansas, or somewhere for the winter quarters. I'd go down and dance on the, show. And I'd get encores. Because they liked the young, skinny young man that could move his feet. They liked to hear the noise. I had one grand talent that put me over, not because I had hand movements, ballet or professional look at all. I just had feet. But I knew rhythm. And I could feel rhythm. And I knew that from day one when I was a little boy.
He didn't have any.
So I didn't have a profession. I didn't have a trade. I had never, when I was ready to marry, I came out of this business and I couldn't drive a nail, so to speak. I couldn't square up a board in my early 20s now before I got married. I didn't have a trade, never read books, never prayed in church. It's never, never, never. I was the most blank person, but the gospel changed all that. Now I have more records, if I can say it in a boastful tone with a little humility. I don't think there's anybody in the 11 million members of the church that have as many personal records as Wade Hayes.
I believe it.
I've been told that I do. Okay, well, now you have that. I didn't know you were getting on out of Sarah onto Wade.
Can't know everything about Wade until you know something about their folks. Grandma?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us, if you will, where you were born, your parents, your roots, as much as you want to tell us about that.
Okay. I was born in 1918 in Traskwood, Arkansas. And at that time, I think my dad was doing the best he ever did in his whole life. They had a farm, and at that time they had already got rid of the farm. And he was working in timber. And my sister had the whooping cough. One just 2 years old when I was born. Older had the whooping cough. So I was born with a whooping cough in my face. And I took it as soon as I could. So Mom said it was a real struggle for the first 6 months because whooping cough, they didn't know what to do with it. Just think I'm going to not make it. It was a struggle to get it. And Mom always thought because I had such a horrific entry into the world that I was more sickly than Olta was. And I believe that she was sort of robust as far as energy and health, more so than me. But in coming up, I do remember that we were poor, and Daddy went from timber. At first, he was working in timber, and he would measure. They call him a scaler. And he sharpened saws and went from job to job in the woods, sharpening saws. And so then he got into the oil whenever the oil was discovered in El Dorado. Well, it so happened that Wade and I lived not too far apart as little children, but didn't know it. We were both in the El Dorado oil field. And so we had a little shotgun house, and we had lived in a place called Lumberton. And
that's Lumberton, Arkansas.
Lumberton, Arkansas. This Lumberton in Texas is probably named for it because I think this oil field came out after that one did. And my first memories are in Lumberton, where I remember my first snake. And that was my first memory. Oh, and I followed the kids off into the woods and to play, and so they didn't know that I was coming, and I was toddling along, and then they turned around and saw me, and I thought they were going to be glad to come pick me up and something, and they started screaming, and so it turned out I didn't know to be afraid of snakes, but I was afraid because of the way they acted. And so then we moved away from there when I was 3. And then that's my next memory, the day we moved to El Dorado. And I was sitting in an old tire swing, and I was going up and down and letting the cat die, spinning around, making myself sick, wanting to go in the house. Mama wouldn't let me in because they were trying to get things straight. Mama was irritated. I couldn't understand why she was so irritated when here we were and moved to this big city. You know, we ought to all be happy. We lived there until I was 6, and then that. And at that time, what Daddy was doing was working with horses. And we had horses, and there was a barn close to our house. I guess he had rented it. And he kept his horses up there. And he used them to pull people out of the mud, because there wasn't any paved streets or gravel streets even, and they were going out and drilling these wells, you know, in marshes and things, and going in. I don't know that they were going. I saw my first car there in El Dorado, but I don't think that it was cars that they were pulling out of the mud. I think it was other horses and other wagons, and they were hauling these pipelines and things like that on them. And so I had my first friend. Her name was Jimmy. No, my first friend was Lois. And I was so thrilled to find a friend. And Mama, raised me, I guess like I raised mine, like Sarah raised hers, is, just run wild and come back and eat at mealtime. So I was in the woods and by myself, and I heard someone singing, so it kind of frightened me a little bit, but I kept listening, and it didn't sound like anything bad. So I went back. I said, "Hey," or something. I called out to them. She called back to me, and I went up there, and she was making a playhouse out of straw, pine straw, and so I joined her in play, and we had a wonderful time. And my heart just overflowed with love for her, because this was my first friend. And Olga, my sister, who was 2 years older than me, did not accept me in her social group. And so I didn't have a close relationship with her. And so Lois and I were very, very close. And so then there's no story, but I do want to tell it. Then I made friends with another little girl whose name was Jenny. And we walked up the street to Hayes grocery store. And so Mom would send me, by that time I was 6 years old, and she'd send me to the store with a note sometimes and whatever. But anyhow, Jimmy and I were at the store. And there was a gum machine there. And so when we came out, we were wishing that we could have a penny that we could put in the gum machine, but knew that we didn't. And she says, "You don't have to have a penny." Said, "You can pick up a little bitty rock, a little slick rock, and put it in there, or else you can get one of the corks out of a Coke lid, soda pop lid, and stick in there, and that's just a machine. It's not a person. You can't see it. He thinks it's a penny. So we got busy real quick, and we hunted all of, the flat rocks we thought would go in there, and the coke lids, and nothing. We didn't prove the machine. It never coughed up any chewing gum. So we left. And next day or so, met my sister Olta. And she said, guess what? And we said, what? She said, there's a $25,000 reward for Vivian and Jimmy for messing up the gum machine. And I said, oh no. She said, they're going to put y'all in jail. And so I was so scared, and I ran home and I crawled under the bed. And there was a little curtain on where Mom kept the meat, and she just had it on a salt meat, and it was under a table, and she put a curtain around it so you couldn't see the meat under there. And I crawled under there first and got in the meat, the salt meat. But that was too uncomfortable, so I snuck out and got under the bed. And so pretty soon Mama came, Vivian. And so I said, I didn't respond at all. She said, now where could that kid be? And says, but I think she knew where I was now. But she says, kept calling, Vivian. And so she said, now I don't know where she is. She's the only one that will go to the store for me when I need to go, need her to go without fussing. She's always the best. Now I realize that was, I thought I'm just hearing her think. But what she was trying to coax me out from under the bed. She knew I was in trouble. And, but I didn't come. I didn't crawl out. I stayed under there, and she let me stay until I got ready to come out. And so I snuck around for a while, and then the cops never did come. And so we weren't in prison, so we went back to the store. And I had some money this time. And so I made my purchase for Mom. And when I came back out, I had a penny, so I put it in the gum machine. And it wouldn't cough up anything. And so I went in and told the store man, I said, I put a penny in there and it didn't give me. And he said, some kids came around messing with my machine, messed it all up. Went in and hit it and hit it and hit it. And out came one, if it's wrapped in a green wrapper, you get a whole stick, not a whole stick, but a package of gum. And so I wanted my package of gum. He gave it to me, and I went home. But I had such a guilty feeling about that, about me trying to steal from the gum machine. And I never did tell Mama about it until I was 12 years old. And I said, I never did tell you about this, but I think I was afraid. I didn't know what in the world you would do to me, if you did know. But I think that my punishment was a lot greater, because I think you would have comforted me some, and let me know something about it. But the feeling that I had, I never wanted to feel that again. Anyway, I diverged to tell that little story. That's part of my story.
What was your religious upbringing as a kid?
Yeah, as a young child, Mama never went to church, and but she was religious. But I think she didn't go to church because she didn't have a nice dress, or for some reason. And Daddy wasn't. She was only 16 when she married, and Daddy was not religious at all. So she didn't want to go by herself, and she didn't send us. But when I was about 8 years old, I started going to the Baptist church, which was close by, close enough. And had a Sunday school teacher there that I fell in love with. And this is my story about feeling Jesus close to me, John. Okay. And so this teacher told me how much Jesus loved me. And she said he is always with you. And he'll always be with you if you want him to be. And so I went home that day and walked in by myself. And I started to take a shortcut through the woods. And by a ravine, we called it, where water, a drainage ditch, and was along there, but the trees were beautiful in the spring. And so I was walking along, and my heart was just glad. And I was thinking about Jesus is here, is with me. He's walking right here beside me. And I said, okay, Jesus, you walk on the path and I'll walk in the weeds. And so I stepped out of the path and I walked along with Jesus by my side through the woods that day. And I had a very feeling of closeness to him that day. Anyway, that was my first church experience. Then we went to the Christian church. Mama, then she would never go to Baptist church because she just did not like Baptists. And but she liked Methodists, okay. And she had gone to Christian church before my day.
That's sort of a non-denominational, or
no, this was. We went to the Christian church, which we had to travel all the way across town to get to it. And it was real dull to go. And they would have the sacrament. They passed the plate. They passed the plate to take up collection. You're always supposed to put something in it. And then they would pass the bread and wine. The Christian took it quite often. I think they never took it every week. Baptists would hardly ever take it. They had the closed communion, I think. Nobody but members went, and it was the night. Nobody knew when it was. I never saw the Baptists take sacrament. And and during this time, though, my dad had developed a severe drinking problem. And he was getting drunk a lot, and I could tell how happy that made my mom. And so I know whenever I'd see him come home drunk, well, I would be sick at my stomach at that time. He was never mean to us, but he was sick. And one time he was in there dancing. He wanted to dance while he was drunk. Never wanted to dance any other time. And so he danced with my sister, Opie, and she would laugh, thought it was funny. And they'd dance, and they'd play that old country music. And Ida Red was one of them. Said, Ida Red, Ida Blue, I'm just going Ida too. And he'd say, hot dog! and they danced, and he'd go sleep. And but all that made me sick. And I said, I want one thing. I promised myself. I said, will never drink alcohol, liquor. And when I was in third grade, that we had a person from Women's Christian Temperance Union called WCTU come and speak to our school and talked about the sorrow and the misery that drinking causes. And I was so touched, and she would talk about men going staggering home while the women and children were, huddled in a cold house, wishing for food. And so she said, now, I want to encourage all of you to make up your mind right now that you will never be tolerant of liquor. Never taste it. If you don't ever taste it, you'll never be addicted to it. And said, how many of you, I want you to make a vow. And the vow was, I will never buy, taste something or give alcoholic liquor while I live. I will never touch it, in other words. Buy, sell, taste, or give alcoholic liquor while I live. So I took that vow and I kept it. And that was one of the measuring rods that I had about young men, that I said I will never be interested in a man that drinks. A man that drinks to me is an animal. He's not a man. And I would rather be an old maid all my life than marry a man that drank. And I think that vow that I took was the thing that led me to Wade Hayes. Because that was one thing Betty Francis, who was his employer at the time, had told me, says, you need to meet him and he needs to meet you, because I know you would not touch an ounce of liquor and he wouldn't either. And so we finagled a meeting, you know. But went to school, and I was a little underweight kid, skinny. And actually, the school gave me milk at recess. The poor kids they get milk at recess, and I was one of those. And I even though I was ashamed to take it, it sure did taste good. And I drank it down. Then at about 12 years old, Daddy, there was a movie actress, a Miss America that came from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And she got religion out California. She won Miss America. And then she was asked to come to Hollywood. And so while she was there, she married one of the movie directors. They tried to put her in movies, but she really wasn't good. But she was gorgeous, beautiful. And so she married him in Amy's Temple. She went to Amy Temple McPherson's temple, and they called it Amy's Temple in Los Angeles. And she got religion there. And so it caused a separation between her and her husband. She had a child, came back to Pine Bluff, and began to preach. And that was in, I guess, probably about 1930, something like that. And so Daddy, and she was preaching in a little old church, one-room store building. And, of course, no air conditioning. I guess they had electric lights. We didn't have them at that time. But Daddy heard about it. Of course, he wanted to go see her. And he went, and then he wanted to get religion. And Mama was not so sold because she was teaching Pentecost. And so Mama wasn't that excited about. She thought she belonged to a Christian church, and that was her faith of choice. But she said, I'll go to church anywhere Otis will go to church because he needs it so bad. So she went with him there. And so she got Pentecost religion. And every now and then, I'll say this, Daddy would get it again. He'd backslide. He would come in and he would sing in the choir, have beautiful bass voice. And he loved to sing in the choir. And then he would get back to drinking again, and he'd backslide. And then he'd have to come back and repent again. And so he was in and out the rest of his life. Never. But he paid tithing. And so Mama started, and that was the beginning of Pentecost Church in Pine Bluff. So when I was 12, I joined it and got the Holy Ghost. And it was really religious.
Did you all speak in tongues?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the way they do that is they get here, kneel at the altar, and pray. and ask the Lord to say, to give you the Holy Ghost. And then you say, glory, 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 and then you start jabbering, and that's it. You got it, you know. So, but I did have an experience there one time as I was praying at the altar, and I don't even know if I should I tell this? Okay.
Definitely.
So I told Wade about it later, and he was the only person I think I told. But as I was there kneeling.
Hold on just a second. Let's, we've only got 5 minutes left on this tape.
Oh.
Can you tell?
I can finish.
Okay.
As I was kneeling there, well, I seemed to kind of become unaware of everybody around me, and I visualized. I could see this, like I'm telling you, whether I saw it or whether I just visualized it. But I saw myself kneeling at the foot of some steps, and I knew I was praying to know Jesus, and so but there was the steps went like this, and then like this. There was a landing here, and then there were steps up here. But all I could see here was that I could see this light down here at the landing, and so I crawled up the steps to there, and then I could see up into the full light. And when I made the turn, and I could see that full light, and I always thought that there would come a time in my life when I would have more light. And so that was, I guess I was about 13, maybe, not even that much. Well, I was 12 when I joined, so I guess it was about 13. And so then I came up the rest of the time in Pentecost Church until I met Wade. And do you want to tell anything more?
Well, I remember you telling me a story about a picture that you saw that ultimately had an impact on your.
Oh, yes. And when I was 16, it was kind of the fad then for the young Pentecost kids to go to a Bible school where you would live on the premises. It was like a Bible college. And so I stayed away from home that year and went to Enid, Oklahoma, and lived in the dormitories. And so every morning we would have, what do you call it when it's a devotional? And they'd go in and they'd have a service, someone would sing and all kinds of stuff. And they'd be speaking in tongues and doing things. But it was a lot of the oral, like BYU, as far as, super religious, everybody. And so as we would leave the chapel, well, right over the door of the exit there, well, they had a great big mural. And it was a picture of hell. And they had this great big pit and all of the flames shooting up. And then they had people in there screaming and crying. And then they had people falling in. And people, it was a real gruesome thing. And then the writing on it said, millions of people are going to hell because you did not pay your missionary fund. And I said, that is not right. Why should they go to hell because I didn't pay my fund? I'm the one that ought to be in hell. It's that bad, And I said, that can't be. Why should they? That's not fair. And I never did get that out of my mind. And then there was another incident that
Let's change the tape.
Okay.
Okay, we are back on tape. This is tape 2 of the interviews with Wade and Vivian Hayes. It's July the 12th, 2001, and we had just finished 1 hour. And Grandma was in the middle of telling us about her religious upbringing, and she just told us a story about she was at girls' camp for the Pentecostal church. She saw a mural showing all these people burning in hell, with the caption saying, these people are in hell because you didn't pay your missionary money. And she knew that wasn't true, and it stuck with her, and she wondered and pondered about that, and it all made sense to her when she heard the gospel. She was just now starting another story about significant religious experiences that she had prior to the time that she learned about the church and met Wade. That's where we are.
Then I was after when I joined the Pentecost Church. Well, our preacher's name was Brother Bruton, Bruton, and his daughter was my best friend. Her name was Naomi, and then she had a younger brother named John, and so I heard later that John was the one that mounted to something later. I don't know what, but they thought he was the one that was a great accomplishment. And so he and I were friends too, and we liked to just talk, like y'all talk. And so we got to talking about religion, and so we talked about this, great is the way, straight is the gate, narrow is the way, and broad is the gate that leads to destruction and hell. And so we knew from the sermons that we had heard that nearly everybody is going to hell. And just the few chosen ones will make it to heaven, and that by the skin of their teeth. But everybody else, most everybody else is going to hell. And so I remember saying, we're better off never to have been born, if that's true. And so that was a serendipity thought that stuck in my mind. That if that is true, and they preach it every week, every time they have a sermon, come and join the church so you won't go to hell. And that was what reason I wanted was religious, because I was scared to death to go to hell. I'd heard all of that. So that's all I had ever heard. And so I really wasn't religious because I loved the Lord. I was scared of him. And I said, you've got to be religious or you're going to burn in hell. And so that was another thing that whenever I first heard about the church, I met Wade, and then we had religious talks, and he said there is a way that's provided for everybody to have a fair shot at accepting the Lord. And I thought that sounds so good. And also, he gave me the doctrine of pre-existence. And that was really a great thing, which came through our first conversation. Maybe you better ask me a question.
Well, tell me about how you and Grandpa met. And I heard a little bit that you had a mutual friend that knew that neither one of you were attracted or addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
And you met. And so tell us about your how you met him and your courtship.
Okay. It was the first time that I met him. Now, Betty had been telling me, you ought to meet Wade. He is so good looking. And he is a real good guy, really religious. And so I thought, well, I would like to meet him. And so we were living in Betty's apartment, my sister and her younger daughter, her young daughter, and me. And she was sending me to business school. And
Betty's your sister.
Betty was the landlady. She was Wade's boss. And see, this little niece of mine was a dancer also, and she was an instructor for Betty, and she got her dance lessons. She would take her to Chicago once a year for her to learn all the routines. Betty ran a dance school, but she couldn't dance. And so she had Wade to do her ballroom teaching, and Charles Jean did a lot of the tap stuff with the little kids. So she said, let's see now, we had, so how I really met him then was one day, Betty kind of stuck her head in the door and said, he's here. And because he would come and he'd spend the night on her back porch. And at that time, he was so new in the church, he drank coffee all the time. And so he was in there in her kitchen and he would drink coffee in there. And so I got my sugar bowl and went into Betty's room and, the kitchen. I came to borrow some sugar, And so she said, oh, okay. And she introduced us, Vivian, this place, et cetera. And so he had been to see, what was that movie star's name? That was Hedy Lamarr in Ecstasy. And so nowadays, when you would say, oh, a Mormon, that's an R-rated movie, they didn't have them rated in those days. But he thought it was artistic. And so he was telling me about it, how this young girl had been, was married to a cruel man that wasn't sensitive to her feelings or anything. And he was mean to her, but he was wealthy and all. And then she met this poor man who couldn't even. And he said, the rich man, and he was sitting in a chair, Wade was, and he says, the rich man was sitting in a chair like I am, and says, there's a bug.
In his newspaper.
And so said he knocked it off, and then he just moved his chair over there and ground the bug in the floor. And then the young sensitive man, I guess when he saw a bug, he took care of it and he treasured life. And so then she fell in love with the poor man, and Wade could really understand that, And so that was what our first conversation was about. And I went in, I met him. And it wasn't very long, and he called me. And I couldn't believe he was calling me on the phone, but he did. And we talked. So then he would come when he didn't actually ask me for a date, but he would come, like if he was teaching classes, or if he went to a dance or church or whatever he went to, he'd always come back to Daddy's house. And so I would be sitting on the front porch, and he'd come and sit, and we'd sit on the porch swing and talk about everything. And then one time he did come, and he says, let's go down to the park. And there was, this is one of the first, it was a date, I guess, because he didn't have money to take me anywhere, no car to go in. And so we just had to use what facilities there was, and there was a park down there. And so we walked through the park, and the moon was shining, and so there was a little stream there and had a little curved bridge over it, rustic with it. And we stood there on the bridge, and we talked and talked and talked about deep things. I don't remember what it was.
We sung a song.
Yeah, on the way back, we sang a song. And he said, but it was very romantic to me. And I guess to him too, because the next day, another lady that had an apartment in there had talked to Wade, or her husband had talked to Wade, and he said that I was the most intelligent conversationalist that he had ever dated. And I thought, well, I didn't really say that much. But anyway, then as we were coming home, when we left the bridge, well, they had swings there, and I don't remember if we swung in the swings or not. But then it was about 2 blocks away from Betty's house, and we came back. But before we got out of the park, well, one of us started singing, "We Were Only Walking in the Moonlight." And so you want us to sing?
I was about to ask you to. Sing it for us.
Okay, then.
We were only walking in the moonlight, and before we knew what the moon could do, we were falling in love, and we were only talking in the moonlight, and the sigh we sighed only signified we were falling in love. Just a casual meeting, just a casual glance, and our hearts began beating to the tune of romance. And we were only walking in the moonlight, and before we knew what the moon could do, we were falling in love. Okay. Now, that was our song, and we don't want to go deeply into details on our meeting and greeting and courtship, but that gives you a background of what happened. And we did go to a little show, tent show, and heard
Gene Austin
sing. We enjoyed that.
And that was also in the park.
And that was kind of a romantic adventure.
Gene Austin.
We heard him sing, and we loved him because it was natural.
Gene Austin was a star. He was a crooner. He was the first Bing Crosby.
He's
and so we went down there, and he sang. He was the one that made "My Blue Heaven" famous. And
a shade in the my babbling brook. In other words, he knew how to croon. And we just loved it. It wasn't a strong voice, but it was a beautiful, mellow voice. So we loved that. Okay?
Okay.
One more question about you two before Sarah was born. Grandpa's already told us about when y'all got married. You hadn't read a book, didn't have a career except dancing. Tell me about your economic situation at the time Sarah was born, which must have been 2 or 3 years after you were married.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Well, I guess I could tell that part because in as much as for all those years, up to 20, say 20 plus or minus, I did not have a trade or a profession or a vocation. And I didn't realize at the time how inadequate that was. And my dear mother was involved in a dream. And often and through her years, she had a blessing that she would dream of reality, and it would have meaning. And in this case, she said, I had a dream. And I dreamed that Wade had a good job. And that it was a soft job, like he had a necktie on, so to speak. In other words, a white collar job. And I couldn't feature that. But later on, the application was passed around for manager of a recreation hall. And prior to that, I'd never paid tithing. Just like I said, never had. And I felt the urge to pay tithing. And I prayed a kind of a solemn prayer that I could get the job in conjunction with my mother's dream. And I made a kind of a pact with the Lord. I made a contract. It wasn't vanity. It was just simply that Lord, if you'll help me get this job, I'll start paying tithing, and I'll pay it as long as I live. So I made that pledge or pact with the Lord, and I won my part. I didn't get the Lord. He didn't get to send me a revelation that He would comply, but I did get the job. And it was lucky that I did, because the other fellow had more experience in this interview. But I got the job, just like my mother's dream. And that's the first big jump I ever had in my life of making even approach a living wage. At that time in 38, right at the tail end of the Depression, before the big war got involved in World War II, I received as my first salary $100 a month. And it was a privilege to belong to the Line Oil Refining Company Recreation Hall. They had bought a great big hall, put pool halls in there, finished,
ping pong
tables and a lot of other things.
Had dances there.
Had monthly dances for the company and meetings and stuff, and I supervised and keep it cleaned up, and I'd feed them, and I did that in conjunction with my $100 a month. So that left us with room enough to get married and kind of live, rent.
Rent was $25 a month.
So you see, I didn't make much. I'd get a check every 2 weeks, and I'd carry $5 worth of groceries in a sack. I didn't have a car. I'd throw it across my shoulder and walk several miles to our apartment. And I didn't think anything about it. When we rented a house there, an apartment rather, I would take off and I'd run. I'd run home, right through the woods till I got home. So those early days in the 38 and 39 and 40 and 41, there was still not much money. $1 was $1, and it went a long way.
$200 a month was really to be envied.
Well, you could own a home with
and a car.
We couldn't own a home. So anyway, here we got a raise to $105 a month. Finally, we heard about the war coming on, and we heard about Orange, Texas being where they're going to build 6 destroyers and more ships to go beyond that. And the war they paid big wages.
50 cents an hour.
50 cents an hour was big wages. And I started out as a helper, and I was beginning to learn a trade where I could make a living, which was at that time a boilermaker in its infancy, a special apprentice. So I took blueprints and studied it, and at night, and that augmented my income a little bit, and gave me a little raises. But I never had big money. I just had early days of Sarah's life. I'll go back to her first, second, third, fourth, fifth year. I didn't make very much money. I mean, it was nip and tuck financially. And in a way, you'd say, well, you sacrificed or you suffered. But we always paid our tithing with no reservation, no problem, no challenge, no temptation not to pay it. We just paid it for 60 plus years, 65 years nearly. We've done just that because I agreed with the Lord, and the Lord was kind and He reciprocated. And now today, we do all right in our sunset years financially. We don't aspire to a beautiful home, a penthouse. We don't aspire to a Cadillac or a supercar. We don't.
Park Avenue.
Huh?
I said Park Avenue, to be honest.
Just to be comfortable. The air conditioning is fine. We could do a lot to our house and make improvements and doctor it up and renovate, change carpets, all of this. But we're comfortable with it. We don't aspire to much more financially, even though we think we could afford it. The Lord continues to bless us. We have several incomes now. The Lord's been kind. He gave us retirement from school teaching, from pipe fitters, from veteran administration, Social Security. And at this period in time is the richest era in all history when you can receive a goodly income and it's legitimate and honest. That's through Social Security. So we have all of that. And barring sickness or disease, where it would take overnight, take all you have, we're doing all right financially. So, but in the early days of Sarah, we had very little. We had an old rugged home. We had to build it out of 1x6s rough lumber, and instead of shiplap, we would lap it so that the rain would hit the sides and fall down, down, down. It's cascade down. And that's all we had. I didn't know how to put a window in.
It said one time that we could throw, we didn't have to throw a cat out the window. We could throw it out anywhere.
But we had an old wood stove and a lean-to and crude. Finally, we didn't get a homemade bathroom tub.
All the children were born while we lived
in humble circumstances, just as crude.
Well, 3 of them, but Spencer was born to this house.
So there you are. If that's what you wanted to know, we're happy to share that with you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Okay, well, tell me briefly about one more question I have about the church. To what extent did the members of the church, and I'm talking about during Sarah's early years, interact with non-members of the church? Was the Williamson settlement more like a sub-community, or were they really quite integrated with the rest of the
They were
group?
known. It was known as a Mormon community. And,
more strongly than today.
And it was like all of our recreation was done. Every Tuesday night, we went down to the church. It was MIA night, and then in those days they had MIA from September till May. But we would have it all summer long. We played volleyball out on the church grounds, and we'd have play nights every Tuesday night, and everybody would come out, big crowds.
And dances.
And
lots of dances.
Had lots of dances, and people would come from Silsbee and on up the road, Mormons from wherever would come when we had one, and they would dance out there on a slab, and they would sweat until they would, not a dry thread on them, but they were serious about that dancing, and
But we at that time had MIA on Tuesday night, and the Baptists had their devotional on Wednesday, a prayer meeting. So our Orland Portee made a suggestion that we can coordinate by moving it to Wednesday night, so we can be in harmony with when the kids, get off from school.
School on their Wednesday night.
We harmonized with them, and that it didn't make us any difference. So we moved it to Wednesday night. We've held that a long time.
You kind of answered the question, but did you all feel connected with the other saints and Silsbee and Fred and other?
Yeah.
Very much so. We were bonded to them because they were just like next door neighbors. They knew us by name, backwards and forwards nickname, and we'd have socials. We'd take it up there on our own. It wasn't sponsored interward. We just go up there and put on a show because they like to see our talent. We put on a show and a talent show, and but we were bonded with Silsbee and Beaumont and even Fort Arthur to a certain extent. They knew we were here, and we were Lake Charles. We knew all about them, way over there, 65 miles. We knew their condition, and they knew about us. We were bonded.
When Sarah was 11 and Raymond Baker was 11, well, we had a New Year's dance in Beaumont at the Woodman's Hall, And I was over it at that time. I was working in the dance committee, and I was over that. And so we secured a hall, and we'd have New Year's dance, but we would have it on New Year's Day, the night of New Year's Day, because we didn't want to be out on the drunken highway on New Year's Eve. And besides, everything was real expensive on New Year's Eve. So we could get a band real cheap, and we could get the hall real cheap. And so we went on New Year's Day. And we took Sarah, and Raymond Baker's family took him. And he was a dancer, and she was a dancer. And so they danced, but they never looked at one another. It was like they looked down at the floor, but they danced the whole set, and they were just
they were great dancers.
And turned out then later on, they both of them became
But
great
make no mistake about it, even though we were few in number, scattered, Sylvie and even Odom up there, we were not only bonded, but we had the same testimonies and the same spirit and the same lesson subject matter. And we felt those strong feelings that we feel today. When you have EFY now, we had those same things, only on a smaller scale. There's no difference. That spirit was predominantly the same. So there was no pioneer devoid there. It was really strong.
You were saying, is there anything else about that dancing between those two kiddos?
No, there really wasn't no story between them. They just both wanted to dance. And I saw him not too long ago, and I said, "Do you remember you and Sarah danced?" He said, "Yeah, I remember that, But he was not struck with her, nor she with him. Neither one of them had feelings other than that they wanted to dance. But I wanted to mention here that people from here married people from Odom, and the saints knew where everybody was, and they were intermarrying saints. A lot of that was going on. And one of Sarah's first beaux was from, if we want to go through that, we can talk, Kilatato and Silsby. And they didn't see each other often, but...
Well, prior to that, she had a non-member to show you in answer to your question about non-members, how we related to them. Sarah dated Bobby, what's his last name?
Yeah.
Bobby Young. And I still recall a little episode, and it's intriguing what happened. They were on this couch. And I was in the bed, but I was interested and alert and aware of everything that I could hear. And I could hear pretty good then. But they laughed and visited and cackled with such exuberance and innocence as a young couple. They say, I mean, from the first date or the second, they had 2 or 3 dates. But they were on this couch and they'd stay up late. But you could feel the innocence and the purity in the air. Even though he was non-member and he was solid in his own religion, and Sarah on her and hers, they had an interaction of congeniality that brought the non-members, let's say the Protestants, to tolerate the Mormons or the Latter-day Saints. I wanted to inject that because I could see that on a local level, but we were distinctly more so than ever. In those early years, they were Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, and everything. They were completely a different group than we were. We just not did. One time we had a merry mix-up of their singing. They wanted to come down to our chapel and sing old Baptist song. And we got to singing with them. And one of the apostles came down and he says, "Don't do it." Even though that's good social, climate and building good relations, says don't do it. Because you're going to be influenced with it. So that was the only episode we ever had to intermingle with the other religions, even in song. but we were strictly LDS all through it all the years.
And I taught the girls that, you know, and Marshall too, you can date non-members if you behave, you know, but it's not serious. It's not serious. And then sometimes, I know with Rachel, I would say it's time to break up, and she would break up. She'd been going with one guy for about 6 months. I said, that's long enough. And she's, okay. I said, you don't want to give your heart away to someone and not marry him in the temple. So and she liked that guy a lot. But she told him, she talked to him about the church and asked him if he knew it was true. Would he join? He said no. And she said, well, you know, that's it. But I know we're ahead of ourselves.
That's all right.
Well, we go back to Sarah whenever she was little.
Well, let me read you the paragraph and let you guys just talk.
Okay.
It's what was Sarah's early childhood like? With whom did she play? What did she like to do? What was a normal day like? You then described the 2 close calls, when she fell in the burning stump and then when she got her arm caught in the washing machine or whatever.
Well, you let to Grandma and let Mother remark about that, because she knows exactly what happened, and I knew some of the things, so she would be best at that.
It started out down there, and we were living down here across from the Wallace place, and the house is empty now, across from our rent house, where the Cole girl lives now. And we had a little house there, and she was about 2 years old. And we had Arrington's, Fred Arrington was living to our right, and Weldon Wallace family was living back up there where, behind Richard's house there, where Howard stayed for a while. Anyway, that location, the Wallace family lived there. And they had children her age. They had a little boy named Jimmy. And Arrington's had Luella. And so she played with them and just loved to get out and play in the dirt. That was the big thing, was play in the dirt. And and Molly, she would go across this field, and there weren't any trees in here then. And she'd walk across that field and go see Molly down at Hetzel's when she was about 3. And that was her good friends then. They were dear friends to her. And when she was, when Marshall was born, and he was a tiny baby, 6 weeks old. Well, Aunt Grace and Uncle Mom they were crazy about Sarah. They were acting grandparents for her. And so when I had to go to town or tend to Marshall, they would keep her. They would keep her anytime I wanted to do something else. They loved to keep her. And so at this time, I think we had taken Marshall to the doctor for something, probably circumcision or something like that. And when we came back, we were going to pick up Sarah. She'd been staying with Aunt Grace. And she ran to see us, and she was also out. I believe that had happened just before we got there, hadn't it? When we got there, she had already, but Ellis was there. He stayed at Maggie's a lot, and he cleared land, and he was clearing the land, and he was burning stumps, burning the timber and so on. And he had an old stump that needed to be burnt out, and he had set a fire to it, and it had burned where it looked like it was finished.
Coals were on.
Yeah, there was coals underneath, but on top it looked like ground. And so she was running to Ellis, and so as she ran right across that stump hole and just fell down on those coals. And So she started screaming. They pulled her out, and she was burned up to here, but she had on little sandals, and that's where the worst burn was sustained on her feet. And you could see where the leather had been across her toes and around her heel, and the rest of it was really charred. And
The rest of her legs?
of her foot,
Top of her foot, actually.
and just a little bit of her leg down to here. But it seemed like there was something up there because later on it showed up. But so we grabbed her up and took her. There was a DO inviter named Gribble, Dr. Gribble, and I took her to him. And he was not a burn specialist. He didn't know what to do, but he had some kind of ointment or something, a lotion, that he poured it all over her legs and wrapped them up and said, leave it for a week and then bring it back and he'd see how she's doing. Well, she started running a high fever before the week was out. And so Aunt Grace says you need to get her to a real doctor. And so we went to Beaumont and we got Dr. Chun. And he said, well, I've got a young doctor here named Jacobson who's just home from the war. And he's had a lot of experience with burns. So we'll let him see it. So he looked at it and he said, it's a real bad burn. We need to put her in the hospital. And it was infected. So we put her in the hospital. And we stayed there for several days. And Wade and I were staying around the clock. And Dr. Jacobson was coming and looking at it. And so he said, well, say on Friday or certain day, I want you to bring her by the office from here. And said, yeah, we'll look at it. And if it is okay, you can go home. If it's not okay, we'll have to come back. And he did start giving her penicillin, which was not, we had never heard of penicillin before. He had used it in the war. And so it was administered every 3 hours with a shot in the buttocks. And so she would hear that, and she was 2. She was 2 and 3 months. And she would hear that nurse coming down the hall, her feet would clank, 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 and she'd start screaming, oh, mean nurse, stick in my bottom. Oh, mean nurse, stick in my bottom, and crying and screaming. And we'd have to hold her down, and it's all we could do to get her to take those shots every 3 hours. And so we were hopeful that when we went back to the house to see the doctor's office, that he would tell us that she's okay, you can take her home. But when he took the bandage off, it was gangrene. It was in her,
smell it.
In her feet, right across the instep. And he showed it to us, the little red dots in white. And so, and then as he, we also, up here she had gangrene right close to her knee. He said, it's bad news. And you have to put her back in the hospital. But he was not hopeful. And as we were in there and suffering of the agonies of losing a child. And so Uncle Van came by. He was our branch president. And he came by and visited us. And I think we had prayer and all, and then he left. And about an hour, the nurse came in and said, your pastor is here. Would you like to see him? And we said, well, our pastor's already been here. No. Well, he said he's your pastor, and he knows your name. And all. I said, well, show him in. And it was Brother Glenn Smith. Glenn G. Smith.
About
Like
6
he
foot,
brother to the prophet, wasn't he?
half brother to George Albert Smith,
And so
mission president,
he said,
brand new.
he said, I got up this morning and I had an urge to come to Williamson, but I didn't know why. But when I got to church, said the brethren were having circle prayer for this little child. And he said that I knew where the Lord had sent me. And so,
He said, they told him, you can't get in there.
yeah,
It's forbidden.
he said,
He said, I'll get in.
and so
And he did.
he came in and she had a fever, and the doctor told me, said, if we can keep the fever from coming back, we got a chance. But if the fever comes back, well, he didn't say, but it was like, that's the bad.
It's bad news.
And so he came in and gave her a blessing. And I don't remember what he said.
Well, I don't remember except that when he got his hands laid off, the fever was gone.
She was sweating
She was sweating.
when he took his
Fever
hands.
broke. He was sweating. She began to mend it well. And then, I guess many years ago, 15 years later, we went on a vacation to Salt Lake, and we went to a Sunday school in downtown Salt Lake. And Sarah went in with the teenagers, and who was teaching the teenagers? Ex-mission president Glenn G. Smith. He didn't know. And Sarah called attention to the blessing, and he was excited. A meeting.
I don't know exactly how that
And
happened.
Glenn G. Smith then invited us to work on with his wife to his home, and we chatted. He told us a lot of lovely things. But he crossed paths with Sarah. And Sarah had to remind him of that little girl in that hospital. Oh, it's touching. Because and then subsequent to that, or after that, not too long, when she got well, she put her hand in this old washing machine feeding clothes, the one that got two round ringers, the rolls, squeezes out the water. She stuck her hand in there, and it began to roll up and tore off some of the meat up here. And then Jesse Kirkpatrick was district president and held the priesthood, and he came down here. And I remember his words in his blessing. I bless you, as severe as it was and scarred as it was later. Bless you to a complete recovery. And that was about all he said. And it was a complete recovery. The Lord had his hand on her, even with all those traumatic experiences. So anyway, I want to add that little episode.
That was a real hard time because I had a brand new baby, Marshall, and he wasn't digesting his food and spitting.
Burping up, spitting up.
Crying all the time. And every day I had, they called it some kind of water. I had to bathe her feet in this water and poured it over the bandage, and it really was Clorox water, and had to do that and dress it. And then the day that I took the bandage off her feet, well, she ran her arm through the ringer. And she was a real active little girl. One time we went to see Mama, and she was, we liked to surprise Mama. We wouldn't tell her we were coming. We just drop in. And so we like to see her, go on about, oh, I can't believe you kids are here. And so when she was greeting us, we drove our car up to her little house, which was on an oil lease. And so she had a little shanty there. And so she ran out in the yard to hug us and greet us. And I didn't know you were coming. And we said, where's Sarah? So she had run in the house as soon as she got there. And Mama said, she went in and found her and said she's unpacking. She had gone to her sewing machine and pulled out all the drawers and had all the threads and the needles and everything that was in those drawers out on the floor.
She was noted for unpacking.
Oh, she was.
It was just like it was a duty.
She got right into it. And
so one little sidelight is not a sidelight even. It's just something that Sarah, I recall vividly. I remember her positive attitude. Even as a little child, she was cheerful, smiling. And the hard knocks, the rains, the sleet, the snow, nothing marred her little sweet disposition, even in the early tender years when she was 3 or 4 years old. When she was about 3 or 4 years old, she had the prettiest curly little hair, like a little movie, like Shirley Temple. You know, it was in little ringlets all the way down, and she was the prettiest little baby girl that ever lived at that one particular time. She got up in teenagers and saying, if you nomenclature your body changing all. At that time, I still remember. And then the highlight of it is, one time Grandma and Grandpa, we had a little discord, little differences. And so we started off to church and tried to subdue our emotions began to rise, you know. Yeah, the tactful way to say it. But Sarah had such a sweet little countenance and grabbed our hands with such loving sweetness to go to church gleefully and gladly, like you just can't imagine. I can still steer. She subdued our spirits. She had a bearing on the way we felt and helped us to normalize, because without saying a word, because that little gleeful way when she went about, and always was that way. She was always laughing, smiling. And I remember when they got married, and you take those pictures of Bernie and Sarah when they honeymooned through the mountains, there was nothing but joyful glee. And I want to tell you one more thing while I'm in that vein about Sarah. Even in her family years, when she had a large family, and I don't mind sharing this. I don't think it's out of order to share it. I had asked Garrison Sunday once, I'd ask him, in a temple interview, I'd say, how happy are you on A, B, C, or what? And I've got some of them would say B or B minus, when I thought they were an A. Well, that's beside the point. But Sarah Packard is the only person, married or unmarried, that I ever interviewed or took a survey on, officially or formally, or as the Lord would have it. Gave me a resounding A+. And I thought that reflected all of her years from day one. Her countenance is a happy. And Spencer W. Kimball said, no unhappy person will go to the celestial kingdom of God, I guess, truly unhappy. But I can say that for as Sarah is concerned, she was a happy person all her days.
I think we're in there for tonight.
we got some more time.
Well, we're just about out of time, believe it or not. We're 15 minutes in here. You want to go a few more
I've got
minutes?
one little story to tell,
Sure.
which is kind of a confession on my part. But she was just a little thing about 3 years old, and I had a locket on a gold string. I guess it was gold, and I treasured that locket, and I told her not to fool with it. And she took it to Molly's and lost it. And so when I was looking for it. I said, what happened to the locket? My locket's gone. And I caught on that she knew something about it, but she said, I said, did you have it? No, I didn't. And I said, and finally, though, she admitted that she had it. And I was furious. And it was not, this is something you don't tell on yourself. But anyway, I said, Sarah, you don't tell a lie. No, you don't tell a story. I wouldn't use the word lie because I'm afraid she wouldn't understand what that was. I said, whenever you do something, then if someone asks you, you have to say yes. You have to admit it when you've done it. You never tell a story. And she says, and I said, and I want you to remember that. Do you remember that? She said, yeah, I remember. I said, okay, now I'm going to put you in the rat house. And we had a little feed house there that kept our feed for our chickens and so forth. And I said, I'm going to put you in the rat house because you told that. And if you ever do it again, you'll go back in it too. And I left her in there for about 5 seconds. You know, I put her in there and I closed the door and she screamed. And so I let her out then. And I felt so bad and I was so worried that really a rat might come out, you know, and see her. But anyhow, I took her out and then I had loved her and told her, you know, that this is to help you remember that you never tell a story. Okay? So she went on to primary, and they were having a 24th thing. It was sometime after that. And Aunt Dealey asked her, says, Sarah, now, for the program, we want you to tell a Bible story. I can't do that. She says, oh, yes, you can. Your mom will teach you one. You can give it. No, I won't do that. And she says, well, why won't you do it? She says, my mama said I must never tell a story. So she
On the last minute or two, let me give you one more thing about Sarah that's impressive as you reflect on it and meditate. How she could handle tragedy or death with such maturity as a teenager. And I have to call attention to precisely what happened. When Preston, a neighbor, was shot. Robert Harrington was shot. A young teenager, a good friend. They danced together. They were good friends. I can still recall her coming in and announcing that to me. Burst that news. Preston was shot. And she said, Daddy. And she said it in such sympathy and such maturity, I can't describe it. And then later on, when our own little Spencer was run over in front of our house, I was asleep in that north quarters there. And I was asleep, and I heard screaming, but I didn't know what it was. I was yelling. In my sleep, I heard it. It was so strong out on the street. I knew later that's what it was. And Sarah burst into my room and used those immortal words which reflected her maturity as a teenager. She reconciled and she said, Dad, Spencer's been hit, but he's still breathing. See that little phrase, he's still breathing, gave me hope to go out on the street to see him. And it was hopeless that he was taken to realms of deity. But Sarah's announcement, and then thereafter, our kids, all of them, all three that were remaining, Marshall, Sarah, we would have circle family prayer here many times with broken, sobbing hearts. But they, including Sarah, was extremely mature and understanding and reconciled with death at an early age with such maturity. I want to pay tribute to Sarah in that advanced stage of maturity in her faculties.
Thank you.
That's finished it.